Hello, my name is Jonathan Artis. I'm an applications engineer with the Windsor, Ontario office. Today I'm going to be demonstrating my top workflow tips using Autodesk ArtCAM Standard 2017. First thing I'm going to do is click on Open, and I'm going to open my model based on a JPEG image here. And we can see right away we're prompted with a set model size page asking us a couple of quick questions: what our height and width are going to be. For this, all I'm going to do is toggle on to my units of measure, which is going to be inches, and making sure that my width and height are going to be larger than my final product. Click OK, and the model will open. Okay, before I start doing any modeling, I'm going to pay mind to my model information section down here, where we can see our X, Y, Z, and more importantly at this stage, our resolution. As we opened the model from an image, we bypassed the option to set the model resolution, and ArtCAM opens the model resolution set to whatever the image quality is. Okay, and at this, judging by this number here, we can see that's quite low. Okay, so I'm going to come up to the model drop menu, go to adjust resolution, and here I can actually set my new resolution by dragging the slider bar. Okay, so for this, I'm actually going to drag it all the way up to the max and click OK. Click yes to the message, and we can see that's loaded the new pixel resolution. So looking at this image, it's based on some simple geometry. I'm actually going to go ahead and manually create all the vectors for this shape, as they seem to be quite simple. So I'm going to start out using a circle, and I'll snap this circle to the center of my model. We can see that cursor change indicating that I've snapped to a midpoint. Okay, and just clicking and dragging, making sure that my circle encompasses the entire image itself. I'm going to click create and cancel. All right, so looking at this, I can actually see that the vector is, while the vector is a circle, the image itself is more of a ellipse. So I can simply edit this circle by selecting it and going into node editing. All right, so I'm just going to bring these sides in, selecting and using the arrow keys on my keyboard to give it a better fit to the image. I think that's going to look good there. And we'll go back to our selection cursor. All right, now that I've customized to this circle and it's no longer a circle, I'm not going to continue creating circles and editing circles. I can actually use this customized ellipse, if you will, to offset inwards and create the remainder of the rings building up the border. All right, so I'm going to use a tool called Offset Vectors, and then zoom into an area of the model where I can see the vector and the remainder where these rings are going to be built up. So I'm going to select my vector, left mouse click and hold to drag to where I need the new vectors to lay. All right, we can see that's done quite easily. I'm going to close the Offset Vectors tool now as I'm done with it. And if I turn down the model contrast, we can see all of the circles building up the border of the model. All right, so now to build up the relief for the border, I'm going to shift select the inner and outer circles and open the shape editor. Turn my contrast back up slightly. And we can see if we just quickly analyze this image, we can see the illustrator has actually done quite a good job of creating a three-dimensional looking image. And I'm going to use that to base my relief off of. Okay, so for this border here, I can see maybe that's brought up to a flat surface and it has somewhat of a chamfer on the edge. So I'll go ahead and try and replicate that. So firstly, I'll turn the contrast back down so I can see the relief building up. I'm going to select square. I'm going to give it a start height of 0.2. And I'm going to limit the height to 0.05. And we can see what that's done is it's given me a start height of 0.2 and then a chamfer height of 0.05. We can also see the picture representing that in the display here in the shape editor. Okay, I can also use the slider bar to adjust the angle on the chamfer. I'd say that looks fairly good there. I'm going to click apply and cancel. And we can see that shape building up in our model area. All right, moving on, I'm going to window select the two inner circles and open the shape editor using the F12 key on my keyboard. For this, I'm going to use a square shape. And I'm just going to use the slider bar to drag this into the negative to give me almost a groove feature here. All right, I'm happy with that. I'm going to click apply, cancel out of the page. Okay, turning the contrast back up on the image. Now, looking at the image itself, it looks almost as if there's a larger chamfer leading into this model, into the center, more so than what's on there already. If I adjust the contrast back down, we can see we have a bit of a smaller chamfer here, whereas it should be starting from about here leading in. Okay, I can easily fix that or change that by selecting this vector as my cutting vector and using a tool called Zero Inside Vector to drop everything in that vector back to the zero plane. Okay, one thing to keep in mind before building this back up is now that I've used this as my cutting vector, I don't want to use the same vector to build it back up because I could be left with some gaps or some small holes intersecting in between where I'm building this back up. So what I can do to adjust this or to ensure that I'm not going to be left with any holes or gaps is use this vector and offset it outwards slightly so that my relief is built up slightly larger to overlap the pre-built relief. Or in this instance, since I already have a vector created, I can just select that one. Okay, so I'll shift select both of these vectors, F12 on the keyboard to open the shape editor, and I'm just going to drag this back into the positive so I can see what's going on. I've got a square shape. I'm going to set limit to height. Now, before I go ahead and punch in my start height and my limit to height, I actually want to analyze the relief that's already there so I can ensure that my heights are going to match up. Now, paying mind to this section down here, my Z, this is actually a cursor-sensitive height analysis tool. Okay, so wherever I hover my cursor over, we can see that adjusting. So we can see this flat area here is going to be a total of 0.250, so a quarter of an inch. So in my start height and my limit to height, they need to add up to a quarter of an inch. All right, so in this instance, as I want a larger chamfer, I'm going to set this to 0.15, and my limit to height, I'm going to add 0.1, and we know basic arithmetic, 0.1 and 0.15 is going to equal quarter inch. Setting my relief combine mode to merge high, and I'm going to toggle on my display material so that I can see this a little more clearly without the bitmap interfering. Okay, from here, just going to adjust my angle slightly. I think that's going to work well. So I'm going to click apply and cancel. Turn off my vectors to see my relief. And I think that's a good start for the border. All right, turn my vectors back on. I'm just going to show a top view here. All right, so before moving on, I'm actually going to expand my vectors in my project tree. Now, sometimes when we're designing, we're importing vectors or we're creating a lot of vectors. It often becomes very cumbersome selecting things or picking things, picking vectors. So we have something in here called vector layers. We also have something similar for our relief layers. Now these are great organizational tools that enable us to turn on or turn off specific components of the model. Okay, so since I'm done creating this border, and I no longer need these vectors right now, I'm actually going to apply them to a new vector layer and turn them off. Okay, so I'll shift select or window select all of the vectors, hover over one of them and right click. And I can see an option down here, move vectors to. I'm going to select new layer. And we can see a new layer has been created, vector layer 2. And we can confirm that all of these vectors are on that layer by turning off the light bulb with a left click. And we can see all those vectors have turned off in the model. Okay, so I'm going to turn them back on and I'm going to left click on my vector layer 2 and rename it to outside. Okay, and as I mentioned, I no longer need these right now, so I'm going to left click the light bulb to turn them off. And I'm also going to left click on my default layer, making sure it's grayed out and the letters are the letters are bold, indicating that this layer is now active, meaning whatever vectors I create moving forward are going to be created on that layer. I'm also going to take this time to expand my front relief layer, and we can see my relief layer, which contains this border relief. We can confirm that by turning the light bulb off, and the relief disappears. Okay, I'm actually going to take this time to left click and rename this relief layer to outside as well, matching my vector layer. Okay, I'm also going to click on my front relief, coming down here to new relief layer to create a new relief layer. I'm going to rename that one as well, calling this middle, making sure that this is gray and the letters are bold, indicating that this is the active relief layer. So moving forward, anything created is going to be created on this layer. Okay, at this stage, I'm going to turn off my outside relief layer, and then I can get back to my bitmap and start modeling again. Okay, I'm going to show a top view and turn up my contrast. Okay, so this image is actually quite symmetrical. And what that means to me is, why would I create more vectors or more work if I could create one side and mirror it over to the other? So in this case, for this center, I'm actually only going to model or create half of the vector. And I'm going to actually go back over to the 2D view to use this tool. Okay, so over on the left side, we have in our ruler a hidden grid line. So if I left mouse click and drag this out, I have a snappable grid line that I'm going to set up in the center of my model. Now this can work one of two ways. I can drag it out and eyeball exactly where I think it needs to be. Or once I drag it out, I can right click on it and go to Edit Grid Lines and set an absolute value. Now if I go back over to my model information, I can see I have an arbitrary X here, and my origin position is down here. So what I would have to do is divide these numbers in order to give this grid line an exact center point. Okay, I'm not feeling like doing any math right now, so I'm actually going to delete this grid line and come up to my model drop menu, choosing set size, and I'm going to reposition my origin point. And what this is going to do is set my origin point to the center. Now, when setting my grid line, I can drag it out, eyeball it where it needs to be, right click, edit, and type in my absolute position of 0. Click apply, and now I know that's right in the center of my model where I need it to be. Okay, I'm going to go back over to the 3D view here. Now with my grid line in place, I'm going to create half of this center design, or this mid design, using the polyline tool. Okay, and in this, I'm going to use a series of smooth curves and lines to build up my design, which is going to give me some sharp corners in spots and then curves where needed. Now, instead of coming up to my Draw Smooth Polylines tool each time I'm changing this, I'm actually going to use a shortcut key on my keyboard, which is the letter S. And we can see if I click on S, next to my cursor appears a S symbol representing smooth, and if I click it again, the S disappears. Okay, so first I'm going to snap to my grid line, clicking S on the keyboard to create a smooth, S again to turn it off to create a sharp corner here. and then S back on to start snapping around and create a nice smooth polyline around the center. S again to turn off smooth polylines. And I'm going to snap again to this grid line. And right mouse click to confirm and close out the polyline tool. All right, so that looks good there. Remember, if I needed to modify this, I could simply come into the node editing toolbar and edit, pull, push any of these control points. But in this case, I think it looks good. I'm going to close node editing by pressing N on the keyboard. Okay, so as I've created half of this, and I no longer need this grid line, I'm going to right click on it and delete the grid line. Now all I need to do is mirror this polyline over to the other side, and I'm going to use mirror objects to do so. Now I want to ensure that join mirrored vectors is turned on, and I'm going to choose a crossed model. And we can see now over here we have our fully closed mirrored vector. All right, now all I'm going to do here is replicate my first shape that I created for the border. I'm going to press F12 on the keyboard to open the shape editor. I'm going to create a square shape, turn on limit to height. I'm going to type in a value of 0.05 and a start height of 0.2. I'm going to click apply and cancel the page. Okay, I'm going to toggle back over to my display material, and I'm going to turn my outside border on to see how the two relief layers interact with one another. And right away I can see an issue. Okay, anyone that's used the shape editor or the two-rail sweep or any other creation tools would know that when shapes are interfering with one another, you need to change the combine modes. Okay, well, if you're new to using relief layers, then you wouldn't know that relief layers actually have their own controllable combine modes. So if I left click on my middle relief layer, I can see my combine mode down here. Right now, both of these modes are set to add, which is why we're seeing the two relief layers stacking on top of one another. Okay, so for this instance, as I mentioned before, if you've used combine modes like in the shape editor, two-rail sweep, you would know when putting two images together that should blend to one another, we could simply set that to merge high. And I'm going to do that in this case. Going to drop my combine mode, set to merge high, and we can see that's blent in nicely as we would expect it to. Okay, there's also another way to control this. We can click on the symbols next to our relief layers to toggle through the different combine modes. But in this case, we know that merge high is the answer and gives us the corrected result. Okay, now turning back on the bitmap and reanalyzing the image, I can see there's a couple areas in this shape that are going to require some larger chamfers. Okay, so for doing this, I'm actually going to use some of the sculpting tools to achieve the shape that I'm going after. Okay, so I'm going to click on my smooth tool And in my smooth tool, I have all the options or the hotkeys for creating or selecting all my different sculpting tools. For this, I'm actually going to use the erase tool, and I'm going to set this up to a larger radius so that when I'm sculpting, it gives me a smoother result. I'm going to set the strength quite low, as this is a very powerful tool. My smoothness is going to be all the way up, and I'm going to make sure that I have Mirror X turned on. Okay, now what Mirror X does is it's actually a new tool. So it's going to split the model down the center, and whatever I do on this side, it's going to replicate on the other side. Okay, so if I click and drag over the area I want to sculpt, we can see that bringing the relief down. Moving on to this area, and then finally the bottom portion. Touching a little bit more on the top there, and I can see that I've successfully sculpted that area. However, I'm not too satisfied with my result. Okay, I can see I've gone down quite a bit down here, quite a bit here, and quite a bit here. I think I can do a better job of sculpting this area. Okay, so I'm going to try again. I can simply go back to the original by clicking on Revert. And this time I'm going to check on another new feature called Lazy Brush. And I'm going to set it to a 0.5 inch distance. Now, what this is going to do is counteract the amount of coffee I've drank this morning and give me almost a second hand or a steady hand so that it gives me a more fluent motion. Okay, so I'm going to again try and sculpt this area to bring it down. Turning my bitmap back on. Do one more pass down in the center here. And we'll take a look at the display material. I think that looks much better. All right, so as I'm satisfied with the way this looks now, I'm actually going to click on Snapshot. Now what Snapshot does is it remembers this shape, the shape that I clicked Snapshot on. So if I go back in and I make a real mess of everything, I can click on Revert as I did before, but instead of going all the way back to the beginning, it goes back to the previous snapshot. Okay, as I'm done with the erase tool, I'm going to toggle over to the smooth tool. I'm going to set a larger radius, leave my strength at 50. I'm going to turn on Mirror X. I'm just going to do a quick pass down the edge of this midsection to smooth that out a little bit. Now, if you're paying attention closely, you may have noticed that when I was sculpting this midsection, I actually wasn't affecting anything on this outside border. Now, the reason behind that is if I toggle back over to my project view, I actually only have my middle relief layer active, meaning when I'm using my sculpting tools, I'm only actually affecting anything that's on that relief layer. So in order for me to do a smoothing pass or do any sculpting on this outside border, I actually need to make this outside relief layer active. So now with that grayed out and the letters bold, I can come around and do a smooth pass on the center portion, or sorry, this outer portion. Okay, and I'm going to close the smooth tools. I'm going to come back over and turn my bitmap back on. And we can see we're building this model up quite nicely. All that's really going to be left now is the eyes. So moving forward, I'm going to select my relief layer, and I'm going to use a new icon implemented up here to create a new relief layer. I'm going to call this eye highlight. I'm also going to drag that up to the top and create another relief layer called eye. Okay, I'm going to make the eye highlight relief layer active, and I'm going to show a top view zooming into one of the eyes to trace around it using the polyline tool. Okay, again, I'm going to use a series of smooth polylines and lines to create sharp corners and curves. Starting out, we'll have that turned off, and I'll press S on the keyboard to turn on smooth, and just start tracing around. S to turn off smooth, S to turn it back on. And once again, before I snap to this corner, to make sure that it's a nice sharp corner here, I'm going to turn off S and close that off. All right, so that looks good. I'm going to use my offset vectors tool to offset my eye out to create close to the same shape for the highlight. We'll go about there, and we'll use the node editing tool just to bring this over and make it a little more closer to the actual image itself. Okay, I'm going to close the offset tool, and I'm going to open node editing. All right, and we can see here a perfect example of what can happen to some of these custom polyline shapes when they're offset outwards. We can see, obviously, the offset tool has tried to constrain the original shape to keep it as close to the original as possible, or as possible, and it does that by adding points or multiple points and arcs into the newly offsetted shape. So what we can do, or sorry, obviously editing this in node edit is going to take quite a bit of time. We have quite a bit of nodes to clean up here. So I'm actually going to use a tool in ArtCAM to do this all for me, to clean this up and make it a little easier for me to move, to simplify the vector. Okay, and that tool is going to be called Spline Vectors. Now, Spline Vectors works on a tolerance, and what we're telling it is we're telling Spline Vectors to allow the vector to deviate a maximum value of 10 thousandths of an inch, or this could be a user-defined setting that you implement. And we're telling it you can deviate up to 10 thou if needed to create a better or more usable vector. Okay, I'm going to click Spline, and we can see that's cleaned that up nicely. We have basically a series of smooth points now, a lot less points, a lot less nodes that we can now utilize to finish off this shape. All right, so I can just come in and start moving some of these areas in to trace around that eye highlight. And I'm going to actually right click on one of these nodes just to show you the shortcut keys for node edit. And the hotkeys on the keyboard are going to be right here. So deleting would be delete or D on the keyboard. Smooth is S, and these are commonly used hotkeys in node editing. Okay, and I'm actually going to delete this point to simplify it further. Delete this point as well. And just try and trace around this image best I can. I think that's going to look good there. All right, so all I need to do now, closing node edit, is mirror these two vectors over to the other side. So I'm going to open mirror objects and mirror across model. All right, so with my eye highlight active, I'm going to shift select both of the outer eyes and F12 on the keyboard to open the shape editor using a square shape, making sure this is turned on to add. I'm going to drive this down into the negative. I don't want to go too far, so I think that's going to be good, maybe negative 13. Click apply and cancel to close that out. All right, I'm going to shift select the inner eyes. Going to make my eye relief layer active and F12 again on the keyboard. For this, I'm going to create a round shape and take a quick look, and I can see an issue with my relief. Okay. Now, if these two were on the same relief layer, obviously we could try and merge high or replace. But as you can see, I'm toggling through these and it's taking no effect to the actual relief itself, simply because if we head back over to our relief layers, both relief layers are set to add. So as I mentioned before, we can change the combine mode so that the two will combine together, giving the result we need. In this case, I'm actually going to toggle through to see what's going to give me a good result. And I think in this case, replace is going to give me the result I'm looking for, as it's forgetting the shape that's behind it or underneath it and replacing to the shape that it should be, as if that previous highlight wasn't there. Okay, with that set to replace, I'm going to toggle back over to the shape editor, and I can now adjust my angle. And then I'm happy with that, so I'll click apply and cancel out of the shape editor. All right, so the basis of the design is completed. A couple more steps here that I want to go through. All right, so I'm going to actually turn on my outside relief layers, or sorry, my outside vector layer again. I'm going to select the outer circle. I'm going to create a new relief layer, call this dome, making sure that that's active. I'm going to open the shape editor, F12 on the keyboard. I'm going to create a round shape. I'm going to turn off limit to height. I'm going to clear out the start height, making sure that's set to 0. And I can see basically what I'm doing here is I'm trying to dome up the entire back or the entire shape here. I think I'm going to try for about 15-degree angle. 16 will be close enough. That looks good there. I'm going to apply, close the shape editor. I'm just going to turn off my vectors and go back to my display material. I think this looks fairly good here. Okay, I'm just going to turn the bitmap back on. And looking at this image again, as it would suggest, looks almost like there's a texture in this shape here. So what I can do now is add a texture to this face here, both sides. So what I'm going to do is going to create a new vector layer. I'm going to call this texture. I'm going to turn my vectors on. And what I want to do is, since I'm going to need this vector, and these two eye highlight vectors, what I'm going to do is come up to Edit and go to Copy, making sure my texture is active. I'm going to turn off my offset and my outside. Come back over to Edit and Paste. Okay, I've effectively pasted those, or copy and pasted those vectors onto another layer. I want to keep my originals, but these ones I'm actually going to edit, which is why I brought them over to a new relief layer, or sorry, new vector layer. All right, so I'm going to show a top view here. And this might be easier if I turn on my display material. Okay, so I'm actually going to use a tool here called Trim Vectors to trim back areas of this. Just highlighting over the vector I want to get rid of and left clicking. And what this tool does is basically trims back the vectors at their intersecting points so that, as you can see, I'm left with polyline here and a polyline here. Okay, and all I need to do now is shift select both of these and then come over to my join vectors with coincident nodes. And we can see here our number of vectors, which is 2. Once I click join, I'll be left with a number of vectors, 1. Okay, and as we can see now, I'm left with one solid closed vector. I'm also going to do that to this side. All right, and I'm ready to create my texture. So I'm going to create a new relief layer called texture, making sure that's active. I'm going to open up my texture relief tool. And as I mentioned, I only want the texture to reside in this background or on the face. I don't want it to go inside of the eyes, and I don't want it to be on the border. So I'm going to choose selected vector. I'm going to select these two vectors, and I'm going to shift select my eyes. I'm going to choose from a file and select my file. Okay, we have plenty of preloaded textures. However, what I want to use here is going to be called the model RLF, and click Open. Okay, in the texture relief page, we actually have the option to adjust the X, Y, and Z of the texture, but in this case, I'm just going to click Apply. And I'll close this down. And we can see now that texture is applied to, as I said, the backing or the face, excluding the eyes. And that was just how we selected our vectors. All right, so I can see maybe this is a little bit high here. We can see it's created a large step in this area. So I'm going to use another tool called Scale Relief to bring that height down. Now in the Scale Relief tool, we have a new function, which is actually a control handle, which will allow you to control the height interactively. And I think just eyeballing it here works well. And I can actually come over to my scale height and type in an absolute value if needed. And then click Apply. All right, and there we have it, our finished project. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thanks for watching.